Hi, I'm Maribel, and I'm the daughter they forgot. Last year, my sister called our parents useless, packed their things, and left them on my porch like they were trash. I took them in, thinking maybe, just maybe, she'd come around. Instead, she asked if I regretted it. Regret? No, I didn't say a word. I just handed her the papers, the ones that took everything back, the house, the money, the name. Her husband turned pale when he realized the home they'd flaunted wasn't theirs anymore. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing it had all started long before that day. Lies buried in our family, documents forged, and a secret my father tried to protect me from, even after his death. Before we dive in, where are you listening from and what time is it for you? Let us know in the comments. And tell me, what would you do if your own family turned you into the villain, just for doing the right thing? The Texas sky was starting to fade into that soft orange glow it gets right before dinner. I was halfway home, driving the same route I'd taken for years, when my phone lit up on the passenger seat. Mom. I didn't answer right away. I was still listening to an old voicemail from my boss about next week's schedule when it buzzed again, this time with a text. She told us to leave. We're on the porch. We don't know where to go. My heart sank. No punctuation, no explanation, just that. The rest of the drive is a blur. I don't remember the turns or the stoplights. I just remember pulling up to Claudine's house and seeing them, my parents, sitting on the edge of the porch like forgotten packages. 2 suitcases stood beside them, zipped but slouched, like even the fabric was confused. I got out of the car slowly. Mom had her sweater clutched in one hand like it was armor. Her lipstick was smudged, eyes red, hair pulled back too tightly like she'd tried to keep some control of the evening, and failed. Dad. He didn't even look up at first. His hand was curled around something small, wrapped in a paper napkin. She didn't want us anymore, Mom whispered as I got closer. She told us we were too much, Dad added, quieter than her. They didn't need to say her name. We all knew who. I opened the trunk. Come on, let's go. They didn't ask where. They didn't protest. Just stood up, slow and stiff, and climbed into the back seat like children after a bad school play. The drive back was longer somehow. The streetlights felt colder, and the car, despite the working heater, felt too still. No one spoke. I glanced at the rearview mirror. That's when I noticed the thing in Dad's lap. The napkin had unwrapped slightly. Inside was a small, chipped porcelain teacup. Mom grabbed it on the way out, he said, like it made sense. It was the one from their wedding china set, cream-colored with a little blue rim. One of the only nice things they still had. Still holds tea, I said quietly. No one responded, but I think Mom smiled just a little. I kept driving. Claudine's words from years and years piled on in my head. They're impossible to live with, Maribel. You're not around. You don't know how much I do. I'm done babysitting 2 grown adults. I do everything. You just play nice. They respect you more because you say less. Try living with them. She always made it sound like she'd been doing charity work, that hosting our parents was some endless act of martyrdom. What she never understood, or pretended not to, was that they never wanted to live with her in the first place. They just ended up there, after the fall, after the job layoffs and the medical bills and the house foreclosure, and I stayed quiet. I let her take the lead because she was always louder, more polished, more impressive at family gatherings. She had the good kitchen and the matching wine glasses. She looked like success. I just worked, paid bills, kept my head down. Peacekeeper, they'd call me. But tonight, no, not tonight. At home, I got the guest room ready. It wasn't much. A twin bed, clean sheets, a nightstand, and a lamp with a frayed cord I should have replaced months ago. Mom apologized while I fluffed the pillow. "I don't want to ruin your routine," she said. "You're not," I replied. Dad, standing near the doorway, whispered, "We didn't raise her to be cruel, did we?" I didn't answer. Instead, I unwrapped the little teacup and placed it carefully on the nightstand. It looked absurd next to the IKEA lamp and the dusty stack of Reader's Digest magazines. But it was real. It meant something. They went to sleep not long after, the kind of sleep that comes when your body gives out before your mind catches up. I stayed awake, sat on the couch in the dark, phone still glowing in my hand. Texted Claudine, "They're safe here. No dots, no red receipt, nothing. Just silence." I waited a few more minutes, then turned the phone face down. Looked toward the hallway where my parents slept, two shadows barely visible through the cracked door. "I won't let this break them," I whispered. I didn't sleep much that night. The glow of my phone still burned into the back of my mind, even after I turned it off. By morning, I had convinced myself maybe Claudine wouldn't respond at all, that maybe her silence was her version of guilt. But that illusion shattered the moment I opened my email. "Did you see what your sister posted?" Read the subject line from a coworker. I hadn't. I wasn't on Facebook much. I mostly used it for birthday reminders and church potluck invites. I clicked the link she'd included, and there it was, Claudine's perfectly curated version of the truth. A hard decision made from love. Sometimes letting go is the hardest love. They chose to live with my sister. I only wanted peace in our home. She even used a black and white photo of our parents, taken years ago at her daughter's graduation. They looked frail in it, but smiling, like it was proof of how well she'd treated them. The comment section was a flood. "Praying for you, Claudine. You did your best. They're lucky to have had you. Some people just don't understand boundaries." There were hundreds of them, most from church folks, PTA moms, her coworkers, people we knew, people who knew me. But none of them asked what I thought. Not one message in my inbox. No one called. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, the blinds casting long shadows across the floor. The smell of toast drifted from the toaster, but I wasn't hungry. Dad came in first, rubbing his eyes, hair still damp from his morning rinse. He saw the phone in my hand and the look on my face. "She went public?" he asked, voice rough. I just nodded. He poured himself a cup of coffee. "Let it go. People forget fast." He said it like he believed it, like if we just kept our heads down, it'd all blow over. Mom didn't say anything. She came in later, carrying the same cardigan she always wore in the mornings, sat across from me, and looked at her hands. Those same hands had stirred Claudine's Sunday stews, buttoned her blouses before interviews, ironed her husband's shirts when they were newlyweds. Now they just lay there, motionless. At work, no one said anything directly, but I felt it. The pauses in the hallway, the side glances in the break room. I sat alone during lunch for the first time in years. Even the new girl, who barely knew me, suddenly found a different table. Sunday morning at church, it got worse. The pastor's wife hugged Claudine in the foyer like she was returning from battle. One of the deacons handed her a prayer card with her name written in bold. Me? I was invisible. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I just sat there, next to my mother, listening to the sermon about forgiveness and humility. And I wondered, not for the first time, how much of what people believe depends on who says it loudest. That night, after dinner, I found Mom on the porch. She wasn't knitting or reading like she usually did, just sitting, staring at her phone. She didn't hear me at first. I sat down next to her, glanced at the screen. One of the comments on Claudine's post was still open. Those old folks were lucky she kept them as long as she did. My mother blinked a few times, then slowly locked her phone. "I spent 20 years helping her raise her kids," she said softly. "I was there more than the nannies were." I didn't know what to say. There wasn't anything to say that could make that sentence hurt less. That night, after they went to bed, I sat down with my own phone, deleted the Facebook app, deleted my profile. I didn't post a rebuttal, didn't defend myself. I was done handing out explanations to people who had already made up their minds. If they were loyal to Claudine, they didn't deserve the truth. I powered off my laptop, ready to go to bed for the first time in a week without checking notifications. But then, just as I reached for the lamp, a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Subject: regarding the family trust. From Howard Mercer, Claudine's husband. I stared at it for a moment. The timing wasn't lost on me. Whatever it wasn't random. And something in me, something cold and steady, knew better than to hope for reconciliation. This wasn't an olive branch. It was the first move in a game I hadn't agreed to play. I clicked the email before I had time to second-guess myself. The subject line sounded sterile, almost clinical. Regarding the family trust. But the body of the message, it hit like ice water down my spine. "Hi, Maribel. Hope this finds you well. Claudine and I wanted to clarify a few things regarding the family estate, given your parents' current living arrangement. Attached is the most recent trust document for your records. Just making sure we're all on the same page moving forward. All the best, Howard." I reread it 3 times before opening the attachment. The scan was faint in places, but the names were clear enough. Howard and Claudine, listed as sole executors. Full control of the family trust. My parents' signatures were there too, but something about them felt off, too shaky, too spaced out. I stared at the date, 6 weeks after my father died. That's when my stomach turned. I closed the laptop slowly, pushing my chair back like the air around me had thickened. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the fridge and the old wall clock ticking above the stove. But inside my chest, everything was loud. I didn't sleep that night. I kept turning that email over in my mind. The tone, how fake friendly it was, like a real estate agent offering me a deal I couldn't refuse. I wasn't angry yet, not fully. That came later. First came the disbelief. The next morning, I called Mr. Devereaux, the family attorney we'd worked with since I was a kid. His secretary answered, all syrupy professionalism. "I'm sorry, he's out of the office for the next few weeks. Can I leave a message?" "You can, but he won't be checking voicemail. He's on extended medical leave." I paused. "Do you know where he's staying?" "I'm afraid that's private." "Can someone else at the firm send me a copy of the original trust?" Silence on the other end. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to check with legal. Is there a concern about the document?" I hesitated. "I think it was changed after my father died." Another pause. Longer this time. Then came the tight response. "Ma'am, if you're suggesting forgery, that's a very serious allegation. I suggest you speak with your own attorney." Click. Just like that, the line went dead. By noon, I was in my car, driving across town to the law office. The receptionist barely looked up from her screen. "I told you on the phone, he's out. We don't give out client files without written request." Even to a beneficiary? Especially to a beneficiary. I left empty-handed. But something in that woman's voice, that slight hitch when I mentioned forgery, told me I wasn't imagining things. The drive home blurred by. Clouds rolled in, gray and heavy. The kind of sky that makes everything feel smaller. When I got home, Mom was in the laundry room folding towels with practiced rhythm. I leaned against the doorframe, still, holding my coat in one hand. "Mom," I said, "can I ask you something?" She turned slightly. Did Claudine ever ask Dad to sign anything after he got sick? Her hands froze. She said it was for insurance, just a few forms. It was late and he didn't have his glasses. I didn't think to question it. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to speak. That night, I went into the spare bedroom where we'd stored some of Dad's old things. There was a box, a plain metal one he used to keep in his closet. Inside were random pieces of paper, his veteran's ID, a broken watch, some letters I wrote him from college. At the bottom was a yellow envelope. My name was written on it in his handwriting. To my quiet girl. Inside was a note. Remember, strength isn't always loud. Keep copies of what matters. Beneath it, a small USB drive. A label written in Dad's scrawl, House Deeds Plus Trust. I plugged it into my laptop, heart thudding in my ears. It took a minute to load, but when it did, the screen filled with folders. Dozens of scanned documents. All dated 6 months before Dad passed. All showing a very different version of the trust. One with all 3 siblings listed, equal shares, Mom as the primary signatory, and there, right there in black and white, the final page. No mention of Claudine as sole executor, no Howard, just family, balanced, fair. My hands trembled as I clicked through the files. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of finally seeing the truth. You tried to erase me, I whispered. But Dad knew you might. The lights in the kitchen flickered as the storm outside rolled in. But I didn't move. I sat there, laptop glowing in front of me, staring at the evidence my father left behind. He had seen it coming, and now I was ready. I didn't sleep much after finding the files. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's handwriting on that envelope. Heard his voice in the back of my mind. Keep copies of what matters. It wasn't just a note, it was a warning, and I took it seriously. By the time dawn slipped through the blinds in soft strips of gold, I was already at the kitchen table, sipping reheated coffee, laptop closed tight. I had transferred the trust documents onto a second USB, wrapped it in plastic, and tucked it into the lining of my purse. The original stayed locked in the safe under the bed, alongside every shred of trust I'd ever given Claudine. At 8:13, the doorbell rang. I looked up from the kitchen and saw her through the window, Claudine, perfect as ever. Her coat was a buttery pastel yellow, tailored and soft, like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Pearl earrings, hair blown out just right, and that expression she always wore when she wanted something masked in fake concern. I opened the door slowly. "Well, good morning," she said, her voice dripping with warmth I didn't buy for a second. "You haven't returned any of my calls." I held her gaze. "Mom and Dad are resting. They've had a quiet week." She gave a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course. I was just checking in. Mind if I come in for a minute?" I stepped aside without saying yes or no. She walked into the living room like she still owned the place, her eyes flicking over the furniture, the curtains, the small family photo I'd placed on the mantel. One of the few left with all of us still smiling. She settled on the couch like she was settling into a meeting. "You know, you always had a way of making spaces feel warm. It's sweet," she said, nodding toward the faint scent of cinnamon from the bread I'd baked that morning. I said nothing, just moved into the kitchen and poured 2 mugs of tea. When I returned, she hadn't moved. "I had to talk to the bank last week," she said casually. "There was something odd about the property paperwork. They mentioned some inconsistencies, titles that didn't quite match the trust." My heart skipped. So she did know. Or at least she suspected. I handed her the tea, careful not to spill. "You seem nervous, Claudine. Or is it worried? About titles or about something else being uncovered?" She blinked, just once. But it was enough. That flicker in her eyes, It was the first crack in her mask I'd seen in years. "I'm just trying to avoid confusion down the line," she replied smoothly. "These things can get messy. It's important we stay aligned." I gave her a soft smile, then stood and retrieved a plain envelope from the bookshelf drawer. I placed it gently on the table in front of her. It was sealed, neatly labeled "Copies, Trust and Property." She stared at it, then looked up at me. "What's this?" "Just what it says. I've started going over everything. You know, to keep things tidy." She nodded, her fingers grazing the edge of the envelope, but she didn't open it. Inside, of course, it was empty. I wasn't going to show her my hand. Not yet. I needed to see just how far she was willing to go. "I appreciate that," she said too quickly. "I just want what's best for the family." "Sure," I replied. "Me too." She finished her tea in silence. The game was on now, and we both knew it. As I walked her to the door, I noticed her eyes linger on the hallway, probably trying to catch a glimpse of our parents. But they didn't come out. They were listening from down the hall. I could feel it. She paused on the porch. "Look, Mari, I know we haven't always seen things the same way, but we're sisters." "That we are," I said, not smiling. "Drive safe." When the door clicked shut behind her, I let out the breath I'd been holding. A moment later, I heard the soft shuffle of slippers. Mom and Dad stood there, faces pale. "Why didn't you tell her what you found?" my mother asked, barely above a whisper. "Because," I said, "she needs to feel safe enough to slip. This time she'll make the first mistake, not me." I turned back into the kitchen. The teacup from that first night still sat near the sink, used and waiting. I washed it gently, fingers tracing the small crack down its side. Fragile, but still intact. That was me now, aware of every fracture but standing anyway. Later that night, as I folded laundry in the living room, a soft glow caught my eye through the blinds. I peeked out. A black SUV was parked across the street, engine running low. Inside, I saw him, Howard, sitting behind the wheel, phone lit in his hands, typing, watching, waiting. He didn't get out, he didn't knock, he just sat there for nearly half an hour. And then, without warning, the headlights shut off. By the time the sun stretched across the porch, warming the dew on the railings, I already knew something was wrong. I opened the front door to grab the paper, but there was no newspaper, just a plain manila envelope with no name, no return address. I picked it up carefully, feeling its weight, the thickness of its contents. Inside, a series of glossy photos slid onto my kitchen table. My breath caught before the second one even hit the wood. There was a picture of my parents asleep, my father's mouth slightly open, my mother curled against him like she always did. Another showed the living room, lamp on, curtains drawn halfway. Then the hallway, time-stamped just past midnight. Each shot came from an angle only possible from inside the house. I stood frozen. The front door had been locked, the windows shut. We had no pets, no guests. Whoever took these hadn't broken in. They had access. My stomach churned. I grabbed my phone, snapping digital copies of the photos, then deleted them almost immediately. But I kept one, just one, the clearest image of my parents sleeping. The kind of vulnerability you don't show the world, but sometimes need to prove what's been done to you. I placed it in the drawer beneath the old teacup and closed it softly. Around noon, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Maribel?" the voice on the other end said. Polished, slick, Howard. "You're letting this get under your skin. Look, why don't we meet for coffee? Just talk, like adults." I didn't say yes, I didn't say no. Instead, an hour later, I pulled into a diner off Route 75. One of those places with sticky menus and waitresses who know your name after the second visit. I slid into a booth by the window. Howard was already there, stirring sugar into his coffee, like it was the most casual thing in the world. "Glad you came," he said smoothly. I didn't respond. He leaned in, dropped his voice. "I get it. You're worried. Change is hard. But dragging lawyers into this, that's not necessary." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny. I never mentioned a lawyer." His lips curled just slightly. "Let's just say Claudine and I have connections. We like to stay informed." He reached into his coat and slid a folded paper across the table. "A proposed amendment. Simple update to the trust. Just a formality. Keeps everything running smoothly." I didn't touch it. Instead, I lifted my cup of lukewarm coffee and took a slow sip. My hand didn't tremble. "I'll have my lawyer review it." There was a pause, sharp and thin. "I thought you didn't have one." I set the cup down. "I didn't, until this morning." He didn't blink, but his silence spoke louder than anything. "You know how your parents are," he said, suddenly softer. "Their health. Stress isn't good for them. We all want what's best, don't we?" That smile, the one that tried to disarm. But now I saw it for what it was, a mask over a threat. I stood up, slid the amendment back to him. "Don't call me again, Howard. Any communication moving forward goes through legal. That's how adults handle things." He stared as I walked out. Back home, I didn't say much. My mother was folding blankets on the couch, her hands gentle, methodical. "You sound like your father when you talk now," she murmured. I paused in the doorway. "He would have hated all of this," I said quietly. "Not all of it," she replied. "Just the lies." That night, I powered up my laptop. I reached out to Rachel, an old college friend who worked at a law firm in Austin. We weren't close anymore, but I trusted her. I told her everything in measured detail. She didn't ask for drama, just facts. We started a document trail, property records, witness lists. I requested a background check on Howard, began a folder system, backup drives, chain of custody forms. I wasn't just fighting for my parents anymore. I was building a wall around the truth. Later, as I sat among the printouts, notes, and files, my mother entered the room holding something familiar. She placed the teacup beside my laptop. "Don't let them spill this one," she whispered. I nodded. "Not this time." The house was quiet, the kind that settles into your bones after a long day. I thought maybe, just maybe, the worst had passed. But as I shut the lights and climbed into bed, a new email arrived in my inbox. No subject line, just 5 words. "You think you're ready for war?" Attached was a video clip. I hesitated, then pressed play. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Our hallway. Inside the frame, my mother passed by, paused near the entry table, and whispered something under her breath as she picked up a photo. A name I hadn't heard in over 20 years. The envelope lay heavier in my hand than I expected. That evening, after the sun dipped low and the streetlights blinked on, I paced in front of it for a moment, thinking of all the evenings my father had sat at that same spot, newspapers in hand, quietly reading. He never had to fear someone watching him. Now someone was watching my mother whisper his name in the dead darkness. I pressed play on the video again. The crackle of static greeted me before the image sharpened. There she was, Mom, trembling, reflected in the glass of our front door window. She brought one hand to her throat and muttered a word I hadn't heard in years. The name hit me like lightning. Gerald. I froze. Mom had said it in broken whispers for decades. "He's back." I never asked. I pretended I didn't hear. But now I did. I rushed into the living room. My parents sat side by side on the couch. Dad's hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles lost their color. Mom's cardigan hung loosely as if she'd forgotten to button it. "It was Gerald," she said, voice brittle. "Your father's partner. He's the one who convinced me to trust Claudine's lawyer. He said it was what your father wanted." Gerald Tate. The name echoed in my mind like an old warning. Some people don't build legacies, they collect them. Dad had once muttered, after a boardroom dinner where Gerald smiled a little too wide and drank a little too neat. Flashback. I can see it clearly now, 12 years ago at a fundraising gala. Claudine stood beside Gerald in a tailored black dress, laughing as he told a joke about acquiring property. I hovered nearby, unnoticed, carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres, folding laundry afterward instead of attending that kind of event. Dad excused himself early that night. "Go ahead without me," he said. "I've got work to finish at the office." That was his last clear evening before the cancer took its shape. Back in the present, I opened the USB drive again. I absorbed line after line. A signature authorization file from Gerald Tate, dated 2 weeks after Dad died. Initials GT, and beside them HM for Howard Mercer. A tingle of cold ran up my spine. This was deeper than betrayal. It was manipulation. A takeover, disguised in legal jargon and friendly words. Mom began to cry softly. She said, "We thought we were helping Claudine. Your father was barely in the ground. I didn't question it." Her voice broke. I crouched beside her, took her frail hands. "You didn't fail, Mom. They did, and they're going to answer for it." I rose, my resolve sharpened like a lens. It wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine, it was about honoring what they built. Dad's watch ticked on the shelf in his study. It always had. Time now counted down things hidden. I reached for my phone and dialed Rachel. "Start digging," I said. "We're looking for notarizations, file versions, audit trails, anything that doesn't match." Rachel's tone grew serious. "This is big. If Gerald's involved, they knew what they were doing. You'll need protection." I didn't blink. "They already started. I'm still standing." Later, I stepped out with a mug of chamomile tea. The evening air was crisp, the kind of breeze that stirs up old, forgotten smells. Across the street sat the black SUV again, engine off, headlights dim. That parallel car, that presence, made me feel different this time. I lifted my phone casually and took a picture. They weren't watching silently anymore. I was watching them. Inside, my mother placed the chipped teacup beside my laptop. The crack in it had widened, but it still held tea. She whispered, "Maybe we ought to retire this old thing." I looked at it and smiled. No, it's a reminder that even cracked things can still hold what matters. And for the first time, the teacup meant more than memory. That night, a single envelope slid under the door. No stamp, no sender. I opened it by the bathroom sink. Inside, a photograph of Dad's old office building. Brick, dusty windows, vines creeping up the side. Alongside it, a handwritten message, simple and chilling. "Meet me where your father kept his secrets." My heart thudded. This was a summons into a war I didn't pick, but I wasn't running away. I was walking toward the shadows he left behind. I left before sunrise. The city still slept. As I pulled onto the freeway, the empty lanes stretching ahead like an invitation. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my mother, not Rachel, not even myself, really. All I knew was I had to be at that building. The one my father used to call the vault when I was a kid. The place where he kept his contracts, his plans, and apparently his ghosts. The address from the letter led me to a crumbling industrial structure on the edge of town. Rust streaked down corrugated metal walls. The weeds had taken the parking lot. As I parked, the sun just began to rise, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The air inside the building was stale and still. I stepped lightly, boots echoing against the concrete floor, the weight of dust coating every surface. I followed the hallway by instinct, memory tugging me toward the office at the back. I hadn't been here since I was 15, but I remembered the way the hall curved, the dent in the wall where he once threw a paperweight during an argument with Gerald. The door creaked open, slow and ominous. She was already there. Claudine stood in the center of the office, back straight, dressed in cream like she was attending a charity luncheon. Her heels clicked on the scuffed floor as she turned to face me. "You really came," she said, almost like a sigh. "I wasn't sure you'd have the courage." I let the silence stretch before replying. "Courage didn't bring me here. The truth did." She smiled, faint and false, like the ones she wore in church photos. "Always so dramatic, Mari. It's exhausting." She began circling the room, letting her fingers graze the edges of broken furniture and old filing cabinets. "You've always been good at pretending you're the moral one, like wiping Mom's mouth and organizing pillboxes made you some kind of saint." I didn't bite. "That must feel good, huh?" she went on. "Playing caretaker while the rest of us actually build something. You always loved being the victim." I watched her, just watched. Something in her faltered, her pacing slowed, the edge in her voice wavered. "You stole everything," she snapped. "Dad's affection, the house. Everyone felt sorry for you. Poor Mari. Always left behind. You think that makes you better than me?" I stepped forward now, not fast, just enough. "I didn't steal anything, but you, Claudine, you manipulated our parents into signing away their legacy. You doctored the trust. You rewrote history. I have the evidence, everything, the files, the dates, the notary discrepancies." Her lips parted. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She laughed, but it wasn't steady. It cracked mid-breath. "Dad wanted it this way," she said, too fast. "He told me once. Said you were too soft. You wouldn't know what to do with the money. Howard just helped formalize it. We were only doing what Dad started." There it was. The line. The exact phrase Rachel told me the lawyer never shared outside the room. And in my coat pocket, the red light blinked, recording. Claudine didn't see it. The sound of the front door bursting open cut through the room. Howard stormed in, panting like he'd run the whole block. "Claudine, stop talking." Too late. I turned toward him, calm, solid. "Oh, I think she's just getting started." He spotted the phone before she did, that tiny flicker of light in my coat pocket. He reached for it. "Give it to me." I took a single step back. My voice didn't rise. "Touch me. And this recording goes to the police, to every journalist I know, to every financial partner your firm has ever worked with. I've already uploaded it to the cloud." Howard froze. For the first time since this war began, he looked uncertain. Not angry, not smug, just afraid. Claudine slumped against the wall like her bones had given up. Her mascara streaked down one cheek. "You ruined us," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, you did that. I just stopped pretending you hadn't." That's when the room got quiet, not in a triumphant way, but in a kind of release, like letting go of a rope you'd been pulling on for too long. I turned to leave. On the shelf near the door, something caught my eye. A teacup, cracked, chipped, barely holding together, but unmistakably part of the old set my father kept for clients. The same pattern Mom still used at home. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the jagged edge. "I'm done carrying what's already broken," I murmured. Then I set it gently back down. Outside, sunlight had begun to pierce the dirty windows, scattering across the dust and shadows. I walked back toward my car, phone still recording, coat wrapped tight. But just as I reached for the door, I saw them. 2 black SUVs pulling up across the lot. The doors opened in unison. Men in dark jackets stepped out, badges already in hand. One of them called my name. I stopped, one hand still on the door handle. And I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks later, I sat under fluorescent lights in a federal conference room that smelled like cold coffee and sealed secrets. The blinds were drawn tight. The only sound was the slow shuffle of papers as Agent Langford slid a manila folder across the table toward me. "You're not the only one who's been paying attention, Ms. Ortega," he said, voice flat but firm. "We've had eyes on Howard for years. Your evidence ties it all together." My hands hesitated before I opened the folder. Inside, scanned bank transfers, spreadsheets filled with coded transactions, fake invoices tied to shell corporations in the Caribbean. But what hit hardest were the forged documents. My father's name used like a hammer, his trust fund split, rerouted, buried beneath layers of legal misdirection. Offshore laundering, real estate fronts, signature fraud, Langford continued. They used your father's death as cover. You bringing us that recording. It's what made this airtight. I met his gaze. And my parents? If you cooperate and testify, we'll make sure they're protected. And you, if you want it, you'll have control of everything. I took a long breath. My father's voice echoed in the back of my mind, steady and worn. Do the right thing, even if it costs you. I'll do it, I said. If it clears his name, I'll do whatever it takes. The courthouse smelled like old wood and nervous sweat. Reporters huddled at the steps, shouting names, cameras flashing. I kept my head down as I walked in, the recordings clutched in my purse like truth wrapped in wire. Inside, Claudine sat stiffly at the defense table, her perfect hair framing a face too tight to betray any emotion. Howard was beside her, jaw locked, one foot tapping in rhythm with the clock above the bench. My parents stayed home. We all agreed they didn't need to see this. I took the stand alone. When the prosecutor played the recording, the courtroom held its breath. Claudine's voice filled the speakers, soft, smug, unmistakably hers. Howard just helped me finish what Dad started. Gasps. A few people turned to look at her. She didn't flinch, but I saw the color drain from her cheeks. Her hand crept across the table toward Howard's. That's when his attorney objected. Entrapment, manipulation, the evidence was coerced. I leaned forward. She wasn't coerced, I said evenly. She's just used to talking without consequences. The judge glanced over his glasses. Overruled. I sat back, not smiling, just steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider in my own family. Somewhere in the middle of cross-examinations and legal jargon, I drifted. My mind pulled me back to a memory I hadn't thought about in years. The last real conversation I had with my father. It was after one of his blowouts with Claudine. She had called him controlling. He had accused her of chasing status. That night, he poured himself a scotch, sat beside me on the porch, and said quietly, "You can't teach integrity to someone who only wants applause." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. That line stayed with me longer than I realized. Now, sitting under the sharp lights of the courtroom, I finally understood what he meant. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about trust funds or houses or titles. It was about legacy, the kind you don't list in a will. The verdict came at 2:41 p.m. Guilty on all counts, fraud, obstruction, will tampering. The bailiff stepped forward, and for a second, Howard looked like he might bolt. But he didn't. He stood, lips pressed into a bitter line as they cuffed him. Claudine walked past me, eyes brimming, but not crying. Her voice was low, sharp like a pin. "You think you won," she hissed. "You lost the family." I looked at her, calm. Family doesn't leave their parents to rot while they chase profit. You didn't lose me, Claudine. You threw me away. She didn't respond, just turned and followed Howard down the corridor. Outside, the noise surged. Cameras, microphones, questions I didn't hear. I kept walking. At the curb, I pulled out my phone. A single message from my mom blinked at the top of the screen. "Dinner's ready. Your father would be proud." That's when my knees nearly gave out. Not from sadness, but from the weight finally sliding off my back. At home, the kitchen smelled like roasted garlic and warm bread. The teacup was back on the table, that same old cracked rim, same delicate floral edge. My mother poured chamomile into it without a word. My father smiled faintly from his armchair, watching the soup simmer. Their hands touched on the counter, still intertwined after all these years. No one said much. They didn't need to. Later, I placed the final legal documents next to the teacup, the full authority signed and sealed. No lawyers, no fraud, no doubt. For him, I whispered. For us. I meant it. I turned off the kitchen light, ready to call it a night. And then came the knock, soft, deliberate. I opened the door to find a young woman standing under the porch light. Early 20s, nervous eyes, clutching a weathered folder. "Ms. Ortega?" she asked. "I think my mom used to work for your dad. She passed away last month, but she left this and said it had to go to you." She extended the folder. Stamped across the front, my father's old company logo. Inside, a letter, handwritten. The date was nearly 15 years old, and it ended with his signature. The ink had faded, but my father's handwriting still looked just like I remembered. Slightly slanted, too tight in places, and always with a little flourish on his Y's. The house was quiet. I sat at the dining table with the letter open in front of me, the folder resting beside the chipped teacup. His words unfolded slowly, like he was speaking directly through the page. If you're reading this, it means I didn't live long enough to explain everything. I put the house in your name, not because I trusted you more, but because you understood what home really means. I saw that in you from the beginning. I read that line again and again. All those nights I'd questioned why he left me with the weight of it all, the house, the responsibility, the resentment from Claudine. But it hadn't been a burden, it had been trust. Claudine always needed to be seen. You never did. I prayed she'd learn that love isn't a transaction. If she hasn't, forgive her anyway. But never let her destroy what you protect. My throat tightened. His words felt like a balm and a blade at once. Comforting, but reminding me of how much had been lost between us all. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it to my chest. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not by the courts, not by the headlines, by him. That evening, just before dusk, I took a slow drive out to the edge of town. His old property sat in the same place it always had, tucked behind a row of trees that had long since outgrown the fence. The building had faded into the landscape, but it was still standing, a little cracked, a little weathered, like everything that survives. I unlocked the gate and stepped through. The sun dropped low behind the hills, casting a long, golden light across the gravel. I made my way to the front door and slipped the candle from my coat pocket, setting it gently at the threshold. I lit it and stood in silence, letting the flame dance in the windless air. "For you, Dad," I whispered. "It's finally over." A soft breeze stirred, rustling the dry grass at my feet, and in that silence, I could almost hear him again. "Good girl, you found your way." Back inside the office, I poured tea into the chipped teacup, the same one that had followed me through every courtroom, every sleepless night, every memory. I set it beside the candle on the ground. My mother had followed me in, quiet as always. She knelt beside me and touched the cup gently. "It's cracked," she said softly. "So am I," I replied with a small smile. "But I still hold." We stayed there a while, just the two of us, the candle, and the echo of the man who had built it all. The next morning, I was sipping coffee in the kitchen when my phone buzzed. Voicemail. Claudine. I didn't answer. I never intended to. But curiosity made me listen to the first few seconds. "I know you'll never forgive me," she began, voice thin, distant. I just wanted you to know Dad was right about everything. I see that now. I paused. My thumb hovered over the play button, then I hit delete. Forgiveness doesn't always need a conversation. Sometimes it's just choosing not to carry the bitterness forward. Later that afternoon, I took my parents to the local senior care center. The director met us at the entrance, surprised to see all three of us. I handed her an envelope with the estate's seal. "In my father's name," I said. "Use it for the ones who have no one else." She took it with trembling hands. My mother squeezed mine. No words passed between us. None were needed. Back in the car, I glanced down at my wrist. My father's old watch ticked softly. The leather band had cracked a little, but it still kept perfect time. Time hadn't erased the pain, but it had turned it into something useful. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I found myself alone in the kitchen again. I placed the letter and a few final legal documents beside the teacup. The sunlight caught the tiny crack in the porcelain, lighting it up like a thread of gold. "For him, for us," I whispered. Then I turned off the light. Outside, my parents laughed quietly on the porch as birds flitted from tree to tree. The air smelled like lavender and warm earth. The storm had passed, and I, for the first time in my adult life, felt like I had finally come home. She called them useless, but they were the reason I found my strength. And she'll never understand what it costs to lose love that pure. I didn't just inherit a house, I inherited peace.